All right, team. So I want to talk to you about business unit economics, right? And I want to do so in a very practical way. And I want to literally show you business unit economics for Startup Exchange, right? So build in public with our own business unit economics. Now, this is coming from a conversation we had today, actually, with our open office hours. So again, we have open office hours every Tuesday and Thursday inside the community. They're 100% free. We jump on at lunchtime typically, and we'll just talk about whatever comes up. And if somebody presents a problem, we'll go deep into it for usually around an hour. Now today, the call went pretty extended. It was maybe a 2 hour and change call, maybe even 2.5 hours. We had quite a few of our scouts on the call, and we had a very healthy conversation. That's been a conversation that's been going on for probably a month and a half, maybe 2 months now. And what it is was underlining it's a business unit economic conversation around our scout program with Startup Exchange, right? So when I say business unit economics, what I'm really talking about is, how much does it cost us to acquire a new scout, right? Or in your situation, acquire a customer. How much does it cost you to deliver value to that customer? And then what is the gross margin, right? What is the actual operating marginal profit from acquiring a new customer, delivering what are you left with, right? And then after that, how long or how many times will you be able to repeat that transaction? Because that's going to ultimately leave you with your lifetime value of the customer. And the whole goal at the end of the day, when we're looking at business unit economics, is the alchemy behind how can we get the landed CAC, right? Gross margin, the cost of acquiring a customer, right? Customer acquisition cost to be less than the lifetime value of a customer. And if we could back into it even better and identify how it could be less at that first point of transaction, that's a really good business system to be able to build around, build into, and then scale off of, right? It's what we work on inside of our acquisition accelerator when we're working with companies for acquisition. It's one of the core things the core component that we'll pay attention to. It's a lever in which we can pull, right? And there's ways that you can simplify the business to improve it if it already exists, right? In our situation with Startup Exchange, we're still trying to kind of figure it out, right? And there's a pretty straightforward, simple approach to be able to do that and approach figuring it out, especially, if it's a new company that you're building and you're in that build journey and you're trying to just kind of understand what makes the market. First question is, who's your customer, right? Second question is, what are they interested in, right? So like, what is the minimal viable value that they're trying to get from you? Like, what is that core minimal viable value, core problem they're trying to solve? And then once you've identified that, what are they willing to pay, right? And it's important to understand the minimal viable value because there's reasons behind it, right? If I can identify the minimal viable value, then I can get somebody quickly what they need, right? So it's simplicity to be able to deliver the value, right? It's also clarity of what the value is, but it's simplicity to deliver it. There's also less moving parts typically, right? So it's easier to support it. So typically the overall satisfaction is higher, right? So the retention is higher. And on top of that, the fewer moving parts, typically the cheaper it is from an OpEx, from a COG perspective. So better margins, right? So for a number of reasons, you kind of really do want to identify what that minimal viable value is and then get pretty clean into that and then understand what makes the market. Where does the market make? From my perspective, typically how I back into this is first I want to understand the customer acquisition costs, right? So what is it actually going to cost in order to acquire a customer in the market? Because the market makes that number too, right? Like when you're paying ads and things of that nature, there's certain click-through rates and conversions, or if you're doing a channel partnership, there's certain referral fees that are required, right? Market gets made on customer acquisition. It's not like something that you can always control, if ever, right? So you gotta know what the market makes in terms of an acquisition cost, at least in my perspective when I approach these things. And then once I know what the market makes in terms of acquiring a customer cost wise, then you can kind of back into your unit economics of what you need, right? What do you need to be able to pull out from operating, right? From delivering that value. From there, you can get really kind of specific in terms of what that minimal viable value is, right? Because again, it's going to be a different picture for something that's $25 versus something that's $2,500, right? But if you can't build a good business system, if it costs you $2,000 to acquire a customer, you can't, and it's going to be a 20-year payback period to, right, to break even at 2,500 bucks, at 25 bucks. Like, that's not a good business, right? So you want to understand what the customer acquisition cost is, and then you want to get to a payback period as quickly as possible, ideally within one cycle, right? If you can get to one cycle profitability, that's a good business. That's a good business system to be able to build around. So in most situations, what I highly recommend is understanding customer acquisition costs, then backing into the unit economics of the margins of the business, right? Unit economics of the business, and then backing into what the minimal viable value needs to be to extract that dollar amount from the market. And that's where you're having conversations, right? That's where you're really needing to get market feedback, right? Because if people aren't willing to pay that price, there's no business to be made, right? Or what does somebody need to be able to pay that price? Because it's by understanding these things that you can kind of work out the mechanics of the business and then make good business decisions. And again, when we do things here, we're doing it for investpreneurs. We're doing it for bootstrapping entrepreneurs, right? This is not necessarily the same type of thing that we would hear, traditionally speaking, in the venture world, right? Typically, if you're raising venture capital money, you're not necessarily approaching it the same way, right? You're willing to maybe pay, more to acquire a customer. Whoever can, pay the most to acquire a customer wins at the end of the day. I believe that this builds a better business, because if I could build sustainably, then I could always pay to win, and I don't have to rely on a finite amount of funds that eventually goes away and then I go out of business. So I'd rather always build for better business unit economics, personally speaking. But that's like how I approach business in general, right? Profit first company. I just wanted to flag that because there's so many different schools of thoughts out there. And sometimes we're reading business books or having, listening to podcasts or conversations, or we're in the business game ourselves and we're seeing these different things. So I just want to be crystal clear in terms of my perspective. Change your perspective, change your approach. So I'm building this for profitability, right? And if you can understand your business unit economics and then design for profitability from the beginning, then you can have a sustainable business. Or you can acknowledge faster that you can't. And the faster that you can acknowledge that you don't have a good business, the quicker you can get out of a bad one and into something that's better, right? And it's just like how we talk about, deals on a vine. You always want to kill a deal on the vine fast because it's all time value money, especially in this bootstrapping game, right? Can't be too tied up with a concept or an idea or passion or a vision. Like, you kind of got to let the business system itself equilibrate and let the market make itself, right? So in our situation, it's understanding what the customer acquisition cost is, what the unit economics are, what the profitability is, and then you want to be able to deliver it, right? So you don't want to be in a situation where you're over promising in order to convert the customer, right? Because the first step is to convert a customer at that price point. Now that you know what you need, you got to get people to pay you. So you don't want to over leverage marketing and sales and sell vaporware, which oftentimes we'll see in the startup space as well, right? And end up in a situation where you're over promising to get somebody over that economic hurdle of the cost, of the pain, in order to get to the value that they can justify paying for it. You want to avoid that. You want to simplify it, right? So that you can sell the minimal viable value that gets somebody to exchange their capital for that solution. So then on the backside, you can support that thoroughly and over deliver into the under promise. And by over delivering into the under promise, what you're able to do and focus on is activation, right? So actually getting somebody into the product or solution and using it, utilization, activation, right? Get them actually bought in, using it, experiencing the value. Because the faster somebody experiences the value for what you're selling, the longer, the quicker it is to that system of reciprocity, of the virtuous cycle of, oh, I get what I'm paying for type of thing. And then the longer somebody's going to retain with you. And the longer you can get somebody to keep getting value, the longer they'll continue to pay you. And the longer they continue to pay you, the larger the lifetime value is. And in business, all a business is at the end of the day is cost to acquire a customer. What is that? What is the lifetime value of that customer? That's all it really is, right? And the larger you can grow that LTV, that's why things like brand and stuff starts to become important. The larger the business is, the more mature the business is, because it's really just about like, how do I extract as much economic value from the lifetime? How do I prolong the lifetime, and how do I extract as much value from the lifetime of that customer, right? Because it cost me this amount to land it. I'm in a business system. I own a C Corp, LLC, whatever it is. I have shareholders, investors. Like, that's all that really, that's what it boils down to at the end of the day. Everything else in the middle is just the types of mechanisms and levers in which we pull to grow that number, the LTV number, or reduce that number, the CAC number, right? Like, at the end of the day, if we wanted to keep it simple, that's really all it is. So when we're looking at this stuff, by backing into the numbers, you can kind of make better, timely business decisions. And then you got to listen, right? You got to listen to the market. You got to listen to what people need so that you can identify what that minimum viable value is. You need to do it in a level of mass, right? Typically, like if you're launching something lean, like 30 to 40, 30 to 50 is kind of enough. And if you can get to 30 to 50 in terms of initial value, that means enough folks are kind of interested. You want to pay attention to what the conversion numbers are. You're onto something. And then you refine it in from a sample of 30 to 50, listening, paying attention to the activation, right? To what is the minimal viable value at a price point that then gets you to activation faster. And then you want to focus on activation and move the ball down the field, right? And it's a process. And this whole thing is a process. And we are literally doing this process live in public with our community, with our scouts, with our customers, with our members, with our investopreneurs, with our community, with you in public, in real time, and hopefully making this an experience that we're all a part of and seeing and learning and growing from, and it becomes very valuable and virtuous. And then we're taking all of this stuff because, again, this is the stuff that we do for companies inside the acquisition accelerator, right? Like, this is how we get into a deal, understand a deal pretty fast, where a business is at, and then be able to narrow in on the levers that we need to pull. Now, it's way easier, like it's way easier when you already have a company and you can kind of come in on the, on the outside and look in, right? It's like, hindsight's 2020, right? Monday morning quarterback type of thing. It's always easier when the business is already there. That's why acquisitions make so much sense, right? Especially if you can acquire right. If you can acquire right, it's kind of simple to do these types of things, right? To simply diligence, to simply identify a couple of strategies that moves the meter into a business, and then be in a situation you can acquire right and be in a profitable position, with less blocking and tackling, with less of the arduous work of having to do these things and build and the trial and error to get something off the ground. In my opinion, it's a lot harder to build something than it is to just buy it and build it, right? But that's why we're doing this whole thing, right? Because the build, if you can build it, you can also buy it and build it, right? So we want to do the build in public with this whole journey, so that we all experience it. This article has actually the metrics of what we've experienced broken out, so you can see it and experience it. And what we want to be able to do is take this conversation and continue to refine this conversation, have this conversation. And in public, like, we want to get to a much more refined version of what the Scout program, if it is even still going to be called the Scout program, is. And today, we absolutely know that there's value here. We know that there's a very clear offer in terms of what folks are actively, not just, right? Because usually you also kind of build things for yourself, right? My why was always clear from the beginning. It was more deals, better deals, supported by relationships, people, right? We were solving for people from the beginning with all of this. That was the why behind it. So it's like selfish to be selfless, to be selfishist. The question became, were there people who wanted to do this? Were there people who wanted to get involved? Was this a journey other folks wanted to be on? Could we create value? And by creating value, capture, our why, which was people, good people, right? To do more deals, better deals. And I think it's very clear that we've been able to prove the thesis of yes to that. And now where we're at is refining this for more of a better experience, faster activation to value, more clarity in terms of the minimal viable value, right? Simplicity. I mean, that's what it all comes to at the end of the day is simplicity. And the only way you can do that is through feedback, right? Is by listening, right? Having the right types of conversations, and then putting things into practice, executing it. And it is to a certain extent trial and error, but it's moving the ball down the field, right? You're not throwing a touchdown every single play. You got to just make the plays that you can call, play the game in which you can, and then hopefully, if you're doing things the right ways, fundamentally speaking, the ball does move down the field and eventually you get to the goal line. So hopefully you guys will be a part of this journey, continue to be a part of this journey, see what we're doing here, appreciate it. And if you haven't been in these conversations, now would be the time to actively get in them, right? Things are probably going to be moving forward faster. And this would be like a very optimal period of time, or a perfect moment in time, if you want to call it that, to be able to lean in, get involved, and also get like a competitive advantage inside of all. All right. We appreciate it. If you watched it this far, thank you for that. Talk to you soon.